Welcome, Heather. Thank you for joining us on the Ideas Lab podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So, you are a specialist in habit change for health, which sounds like a very useful thing. And you help organizations where you consult corporations who are creating apps. Is that mainly your kind of core work?
Yeah. Well, I come from an academic background. So I kind of, my early work was all in universities, kind of looking at how people can change their behavior and what it takes to actually maintain healthy behaviors long term. So a lot of my work now is, with various different companies, helping them, anyone who's got a well-being program and wants to know actually, how do you create lasting change and how do you kind of get the foundations right before you kind of establish a program, or if there is an established program, how do you kind of, I've made this word up, but behavior changeify it, so that you can make the practices more habitual. Because my passion is, helping people find joy in their healthy habits. And if you can find joy in being healthy, it's much more likely that it's going to be something that's going to stick for the rest of your life.
So that's interesting, yeah. And how do you find joy? There's all sorts of habits I can think of I should probably adopt, like, going to bed at a reasonable time, exercising every day. Some of those I can't imagine enjoying them. But how do is it possible to create a joy around any habit that's positive for you?
No. So I think, and I think this is a problem that people come up against a lot when they try and create new habits. So like typically January, where we're like, okay, well, it's January now, so I must give up alcohol, have no sugar, be nice to my other half, save loads of money, everything else. And the thing is, the habits that you enjoy are the habits that you stick with. And so there's two ways to kind of look at this. If you're trying to do too much at once, it's going to be very, very difficult. And often we kind of, shut all over ourselves and tell ourselves, oh, we should be doing this and we should be trying this and we should be doing all these things. But if you hate kale, don't eat a kale salad. If you hate spinning, don't go spinning. It's not the healthy habit for you. And what I encourage people to do around this is to create a joy list. So what are those healthy habits that you enjoy? Maybe it's, you enjoy a stroll in the park, with the fresh breeze. Maybe it's you enjoy going into your garden. Maybe you enjoy having a hot water and lemon first thing in the morning. Maybe you enjoy meditating. We need to focus less on what we don't like to do and actually focus more on what we do like to do and try and bring more of that into our lives. Because as soon as we kind of find a healthy habit fun or enjoyable, that's it for you. Like that's the magic sauce, the secret sauce, and if we can find those habits that bring us joy and cultivate more of them in our life, it's much more likely that we'll actually live a happier and healthier life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, rather than trying to do things that you think are going to help. So I spot the exercises that I enjoy doing. I enjoy kayaking, I enjoy cycling, and there are a few others as well. And sometimes I think it's more important that I go to the gym and do some exercise, even if, a trainer would tell me, actually, that's not the perfect one for losing weight, or that's not the perfect one for you at your age. It's just like, yeah, but I like that one, so I'm going to do it. So it's probably doing some good. It's increasing blood flow. It's moving my body. It's not going to be, detrimental unless I'm doing something very, lifting a stupid weight or something. And I think much better to do that than to tell myself I have to turn up the gym for an hour and do some exercise that I find nightmarish or tedious or something.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, John. And I would say, the second part of this is that if you find a certain habit hard, so let's say, walking or going to the gym, think about how you can layer joy onto that. So maybe it's that you really enjoy your trainer and he makes it fun for you to go to the gym, or you really like the gym environment and that feels more fun for you. Or you listen to kind of 80s pop when you work out, which makes it fun for you. Or you go and do it with a friend, which makes it more fun for you. So, those things that maybe you find a little bit harder, if you can layer more joy onto those as well, it makes it a little bit easier. And like you say, have it feeling in control of your own program and being able to do those exercises that you enjoy makes it much more likely actually that you'll show up and show up consistently, which is really important.
Yeah, and that's a really good idea. There's a weird thing in us in humans I notice where when we decide to do something, it's almost like we want to punish ourselves. And so, I'm going to eat like zero carbs for the rest of my life, or, I will give up, all desserts rather than having one a week, and it's so draconian. It's like something you would prescribe as a punishment for somebody. I don't know what that instinct is that makes people want to do that. Have you noticed that yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I call it like the no pain, no gain mantra, which is what we all think is what's going to lead to success. And it's so interesting because of all the research kind of shows the opposite. So actually, if you set yourself up to like punish yourself into change, it's much more likely that you'll fail. It's much more likely you'll go off track sooner because basically the goals that you're trying to push yourself into, you don't really connect with them on a deeper level, if that makes sense. So similar to like, if you're trying to build a business that you don't really connect with, you really have to kind of, Simon Sinek, you have to go back to your why. And I think that's really important when it comes to, habit change is so often, we take this kind of all or nothing approach. And yeah, if it's not painful and if it's not punishing, it's not worthwhile. But actually, it's actually really ineffective. And actually, the habits that stick the best are those that are formed kind of gently, formed slower, formed because actually they mean something to us. So there's a concept in psychology called intrinsic motivation. And it's all around actually, it translates in Latin into the word goods for the soul. And it's all about, things that actually make you feel alive. So, being a healthy person allows you to be at your best each day, allows you to give yourself to your family best. It allows you to give yourself to your work best. It's about finding those values about being healthy is, rather than focusing on the number on the scales, the time you're going to run in a marathon, how heavy you lifted in the gym, the number on your paycheck. They're all extrinsic goals. And those goals, unfortunately, they need the kind of Facebook likes, they need the kind of pats on the back, they need the extrinsic validation for you to carry through with them. And that's why those goals aren't sticky. Whereas if you're pursuing something because it's making you feel better each day, it's in line with who you are, what you believe, and what you wish to represent in the world, then those goals are the sticky goals. That's an intrinsic goal. If you identify with that goal, if it's formed part of who you are and it's part of actually, the key values that you hold as an individual, those are the goals that we're going to stick to. And those are the goals that we're less punishing at. Because we all think that we can kind of beat ourselves with a big stick into habit change. But actually, time and time again, they've shown in studies that actually having a more compassionate approach, taking a slower approach, actually results in more long-term change. So I always say to people, to make bite-sized changes, and like changes that are so laughably small that actually, they're almost too easy. And I almost say, if you don't laugh out loud at how ridiculously small this change is, then it's not the place to start. So an example of that would be, if you're trying to cut down on sugar, let's just say, and so often the kind of no pain, no gain mantra would be, okay, well, let's just cut sugar from my life. No more sugar. Like, it's not going to happen. Whereas habit change doesn't really work like that. So I like to look at habits like a tangled knot, and if we look at sugar like a tangled knot, if we try to pull that apart, it only gets tighter. What you resist persists. Whereas if we look for that kind of low hanging fruit, those easier outside tangles, and we look to untangle them first, in time, through kind of confidence and competence gained from actually succeeding at those easier goals, we can get to those harder knots. And eventually, the habit loop will be kind of, untied, and that knot will be untied. And the way in which to do that is to start really, really small. So with the sugar example, if you're finding that maybe you want to cut out sugar in your tea, for example, rather than cutting it all out of your tea, start with half a teaspoon. It sounds ridiculously small. Let's say you have 2 teaspoons in your tea, but if you take sugar out of your tea and 2 or 3 days in and you're like, well, I can't stand the taste of tea without sugar, you're just going to relapse into old behaviors. Whereas if you start to adapt your palate over time, and actually if you look at, if you had one if you had like say 2 or 3 cups of tea a day and you're having half a teaspoon less, over time that cumulatively that actually has a big impact. I don't know if you've seen the studies that they did on the 2012 cycling team. So like really high performance team, really trained for optimization. And what they did with that team is they looked at all of the tiny little bite-sized things that they could do to actually enhance performance. So they looked at how they wash their hands, to prevent disease. They looked at their pillows. They looked at what sheets they had, what massage gels, and all those kind of tiny little 1% changes cumulatively added up to, massive success at the 2012 Olympics. But they looked at the smallest things, almost laughable. I think one of them that really sticks out in my mind is they painted the inside of the bike sheds white so they could see if there was any like tiny particles of dust that might have fallen on the bikes that would hamper, performance. But I suppose my point here is, small changes cumulatively can have a big effect. But you want to start small, you want to be gentle, you want to be kind to yourself, because actually that's what gets the momentum going.
And I'm realizing more and more as I get older that it's not about achieving one goal temporarily that makes the biggest impact on your life. It's instilling a habit or process or something that really pays off. So if you make that small adjustment and you stick to that and you use that again and again, that has much bigger effect than you going on some crash diet for 3 weeks and then falling off it afterwards. In terms of your life, if you, for instance, go from 2 spoons of sugar to 1.5, that will actually make a big difference, particularly over the course of your life. And it's that stuff that really pays off. I remember a friend of mine saying she was starting to gain weight, and she stopped eating a biscuit with her afternoon cup of tea, and that was enough to tip her from out of gaining weight and actually starting to lose weight. Because one biscuit with your cup of tea is 80 calories or whatever it might be, depending on what the biscuit is, and plus it's there's a lot of sugar in it. So if you have a kind of sensitive response to sugar, then it's even worse than just the raw calories. And it is sometimes things like that that make the biggest difference. But what do you do about things where it feels like a really sticky habit? Like if I want to stop looking at Facebook, asking for a friend here, if I wanted to stop looking at Facebook quite so often on my phone, how do I start to change that habit? Because I think you've said that willpower is not the answer. Is that right? I don't just go like, right, I'm not going to look at it and that's it.
Yeah. That's one of the biggest myths of habit change, actually. We all think we can willpower our way into success. And that's what the entire diet industry is based upon. And it's an absolute farce. Willpower is like a muscle. So, if you go to the gym every day and exercise your right bicep, by the time you get to the end of the week, you wouldn't be able to pick up a glass of water or a cup of tea. But if you go and you train in adequate amounts, taking proper rest and recovery in between, having variety, everything else, you're going to get stronger over time. But what we do is we rely completely on our willpower rather than actually setting ourselves up with the environment that best supports change. And so those that are most successful at habit change, they're not necessarily those with the strongest self-control. They're the people that have set up their environment so they're least tempted. And what I mean about that is, so where your brain goes, where your attention goes, your brain follows. And so, I always say to people, take a look at your environment, because if you can change your environment, then change can happen. And so, how does Facebook present itself in your day? Is it on your phone? Is it the first thing you see when you're on your phone? Do you get notifications about it? Your phone itself is a micro environment. And so what you see on that homepage, I always say to people, think about what that environment is, because that's best representing your goals. This is one of the things that you look at most during your day. So think about what's on that. So if you're trying to read more, is a reading app the first thing you see? Are you getting reading app notifications? If you're trying to meditate more, is your meditation app the first thing you see? Are you getting meditation notifications? If you don't want to be in Facebook, is it hidden away? And in kind of behavioral science terms, what we call that is increasing friction. So you want to increase friction to the unhelpful behaviors and decrease friction to the helpful ones. So, for example, is there somewhere you can put your phone during the day? Because every time you get a message from Facebook, that cues you to engage in that behavior. Whereas if you can see your phone in your eye line, you're much more likely to engage with it. Just like if you had, a piece of cake on your desk at work, you'd be much more likely to engage with it. So think about your environment. Think about, what notifications you're getting. Where is Facebook in your environment? How often are you in contact with your phone? Is your phone visible? Because anything that's in your eye line is a visual cue to engage in a habit. And when we think about a habit loop, habits start with a cue or a trigger. Then there's a behavior, then there's a reward. So if we can look at what those cues and triggers are in our environment and reduce those and actually increase the likelihood that we engage with those helpful habits. So for example, leaving out your weights, in your kitchen, or your yoga mat lying out, or your running shoes, or having a fruit bowl, or the cherry tomatoes being the first thing you see when you open the fridge, not the giant piece of cake, or your meditation app being the app that notifies you rather than your Facebook app. We can engineer our environments to actually best support our habits, and that doesn't require our willpower. It requires, yes, a little bit of an investment now, but long term, if we can engineer an environment that's both supportive of change, it means that change is much more likely to happen for us.
That's a really good idea. And I like the idea of fewer notifications on Facebook and more notifications from the things you actually want to use. I noticed that that because there's that habit built and it's so strong to look for my phone and look at the sort of payoff at the little red dot, the little red number on Facebook. If I leave it, I've got a wireless charger next to me here, and if I leave my phone on that and then lie down on my sofa behind me, I will feel this instinct of oh, has anything happened on my phone? Is there something I should check after 5 or 10 minutes? And because I'd have to get up and walk over and get it. It's enough to I can feel a little bit of discomfort. It's I can't immediately look at it, but it's not as much discomfort as getting off the sofa, walking over and getting it. And that if it's next to me, I'll almost always give in. And I guess, related to what you're saying, if you've got notifications all over the front of your phone, like I have, at the moment, you go and look at it, then you need willpower to actually not go into them. Whereas if they're not coming up, one of the things I do is I think I've got some notifications to Facebook, but I've switched most of them off as push notifications. So I have to go in to see, I don't get a pop up just because somebody likes a post or something. And by doing that, it means, that's you're taking away that necessity to use pure willpower. It's there's something interesting there. It's like having a cake on your desk. I've got a cake on my desk, but I'm not going to eat it. And that's much harder work than if you don't have it or you can't see it or whatever.
Yeah, there's a really interesting study that they did on receptionists, and they had M&Ms in a bowl on their desk. And some receptionists, they were on the desk, and some of the receptionists, they were 6 meters away, the bowls of M&Ms. And after a year, the ones that had the M&Ms on their desk, weighed 7 or 8 pounds more than the ones that had the M&Ms that were 6 feet away. And it's kind of proximity determines, the habits that you're going to engage with. And what you've done is a really good kind of friction enabler, where you've kind of created that pause where you actually have to consciously decide, okay, I have to get up and go and get my phone and consciously engage with it in order to use it. And that just kind of allows you to think about whether that's something you want to do or not. And I mean this in the least offensive way, but humans are inherently lazy. And so, we don't want to do things that are hard. So if we can make it harder to engage in our unhelpful habits, then it's much less likely that we'll engage with them. And another thing that's quite interesting, and I was talking to a few companies recently and they've been trialing this, is actually to set yourself a time for that. So a lot of people, at the moment have been suffering with kind of doom scrolling and, they're keeping up to date with news feeds and everything else. And actually one thing we've been experimenting with is actually, well, putting a time in on your calendar that you're going to use Facebook or you're going to look at the news. And actually, that's completely dedicated time. And in a way, by knowing that that time is there, it actually provides you with the ability to resist that temptation during the day, because you say, well, actually, I've got that time in later. That's when that task is going to happen, rather than kind of, there's a concept in positive psychology, they call it time confetti. I don't know if you've heard
No, I
about
don't
it.
know that. I know about positive psychology, but I haven't heard that term.
Well, it's these little time windfalls that we get in our day where we get a bit of space. Right now at the moment, as a society, we just want to fill the space. So we want to go on our phone and get those messages read and, finish off, any of those notifications on Facebook, or get that kind of quick hit or whatever. We're less likely to sit there and stare out the window, which is actually sounds ridiculous, but actually is much better for our cognitive load and much better for our brains in general, because it gives us a chance to actually step away from screens, take a break, and actually compress any kind of learning that condense any learning that we've just had, and actually allows our brains to start to think more clearly, rather than kind of filling them up with more to do. And so actually, by dedicating a specific time where you go on social media, it can help you alleviate that pressure on yourself throughout the day.
I think that's a really good point. And I remind myself sometimes, particularly if I'm out and say I'm stuck in a queue or something, I know it's only going to be a couple of minutes, my temptation is to go straight to my phone. And I actually say to myself, like, be bored, like allow yourself to be bored for a minute, because I know I've read this research says it's good for you. And what I noticed a while ago is that I wasn't having as many creative ideas for writing for like the next book. And I kind of wondered why that was happening. And I think it came down to a couple of things. And one of them is that I get a lot of my ideas while reading other nonfiction books. So they stimulate a lot of ideas. Like I've been trying to read Sapiens for 3 years or something, because every page I read just makes my brain just go, oh my God, and it like flies off and has 1,000 ideas. I just find the book mind blowing. But it takes a long time to read for that reason. And nothing else, nothing I surf on social media, even the blog posts I read, it's extremely rare that a post, even when it's well written, has the effect a book does for some reason. And then the other thing I realized is that it was filling every moment where in the past, a few years back, I would have been, staring into space or whatever. And now I fill it with looking at my phone. And so I've tried to adjust those two things with some success now, where I make a point of staring out the window and stuff like that. And I'm lucky I've got quite a nice view out the window, which helps as well. So
it's interesting, that concept, because the thing is, like, we have this, especially I think as entrepreneurs and business owners, that feeling that we need to achieve in every moment. And actually, by not achieving, we're achieving more, if that makes sense. But we have to almost give ourselves permission to take that time. And we're so used to filling that time that it actually becomes quite difficult for us to actually take space between time. But it goes back to what we said about the phone environment. If you get a moment of time, maybe it's about having a few things that you do when you get that time confetti, so you're less likely to engage with your phone. So maybe it's like taking a few deep breaths, or, looking out the window, or, standing on one leg because it's, what your PT said would be good for your glutes, or, taking a stretch, or having a glass of water. And it sounds so simplistic, but if we can start to train ourselves to do other things rather than fill our time at that time, it might be even that you think about something you're grateful for that day, or, how when your other half laughed this morning, how nice that was, or something you're looking forward to in the evening. Allowing ourselves to daydream and to idle for a while is, really can be really productive in the long run.
Yeah, I interviewed Manny Vaya, who's runs a thing called 2,000 Books, and his aim was to read, I think it was 2,000 books over the course of, I don't know how, I think he was reading a book every day. I forget now. He's the current episode. And he was just finishing off a nonfiction book every single day. And I said, well, how do you do that? And I assumed it would be all about speed reading, and he certainly does speed read. He says basically just use those fragments of time, and all those fragments of time where we are tempted to look at our phone or do whatever else is our, distraction of choice. He actually picks up the book that he's currently reading and reads that, even if it's one page, and puts it down. And that, like, it's amazing what you can get done when you're not filling that time confetti with, waste, with stuff that doesn't actually have any value.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it goes back to, like you say, like, what are our values? So what are those things that we want to be notified of or get in place? And I'm sure that he probably has his book in proximity, in eye line, in reach, that he knows he can reach for it, and he's made it easy for himself to reach for it, during the day. So it's just about, taking a step back and saying, well, what do I value? Where do I want to go in life? And how do I create an environment that best supports that? Because you'd be surprised at actually how simple it is to make changes to your environment, but how massive that can have an impact on your health, happiness, productivity, everything else.
Yeah, I'm noticed that I like physical books. I like paperbacks more than Kindle. And part of the reason why is because I get excited just looking at the cover. It makes me want to read it. Whereas the Kindle is just this, dead piece of technology until you switch it on. And then I think what they've really missed on Amazon is it goes straight into the book. I would rather they showed as a screensaver, because they used to have authors, and then I think they probably got some stick because all the authors were men, because all the authors are like 100 years old in order to be as uncontroversial as possible. And they replaced it with pencils. So I wish they had the screensaver on Kindle is the current book you're reading, because that would make me want to pick it up and read it. Now, there's a privacy issue. Some people might not want to see. They might like the fact that you can't tell what you're reading on the Kindle, but you could always set that as an option. So unless maybe there is an option to show your current book, and I haven't actually seen it, but I'd love that to be the case. There's a question that came up for me earlier. Which a friend of mine runs Beyond Chocolate, and they have an interesting philosophy about food, and they help women have a healthier relationship with food. And it's run by two women, Audrey and Sophie, who are sisters. And their philosophy is that actually, if you can fall back in love with food and with your body, you can have any kind of temptation around you. And they actually say, if your weakness is M&Ms, go and buy a maxi pack of M&Ms and have them in the house. And then you can eat them whenever you want. But there are some rules around it. And so they say that whatever you eat, you have to put it on a plate. So you have to kind of, like, if you're going to have a bunch of M&Ms, you take the amount of M&Ms you think you'll probably want, stick them on a plate, sit them down, and then you have to eat consciously. So unlike the receptionists who were probably working when they ate, it's okay to eat an M&M, but you have to actually be doing nothing but eating the M&Ms. And then you might find that after one or two, that actually that's all I needed. I just needed that little hit of sugar or something. And I don't need to eat 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 without thinking about it. But I've often wondered, because I feel like if I have chocolate in the house, I will eat it. I know it's there, and I will want a piece after every meal. And I seem to be quite sensitive to sugar and put on weight very easily if I eat anything with sugar in it. So, I mean, what's going on there? Do you believe in their philosophy, or does the research show that it's better not to have the stuff in the house?
So that's a great question. And it's something actually I cover in my new course, is mindful eating and having a mindful relationship and cultivating intuition with yourself. So knowing, am I eating emotionally, or am I eating for a physical need? Or am I eating for enjoyment? And being able to actually differentiate between those is really important, because it doesn't tend to be that we will overeat broccoli, for example, because broccoli doesn't tend to be a comfort food for people, whereas a lot of people have, that childhood association with sweets and everything else. And I totally agree with what Beyond Chocolate are trying to do in terms of actually teach us that intuition about knowing, well, how much is too much. And it's an exercise. I used to be a lecturer in behaviour change, and I used to do it with my students, and at the start, I'd say to them, well, how many roses would you normally have at Christmas, or a quality street or whatever? And they say, oh yeah, I'd sit, watching Back to the Future, and I'd eat 24 or 30 or whatever. And so we'd practice eating one mindfully. And I'd say to them, okay, well, how many more could you eat in this way? And they were like, oh God, like 3.
Yeah.
And these were young lads, like 9, and women like 19 years old. And it was when they started to attend to it, because it comes back to what we were talking about, where your attention goes, your brain follows. When they started to attend to it, when they started to actually notice the flavors, notice their own personal hunger, notice how they felt about it. That was the difference. And like you said so well, John, the secretaries had the food on their desk. They weren't paying attention to it. They were just scoffing it because it was there in their environment. Just like, often we'll pick up a message or an email and everything and not really pay attention to it and just kind of shoot it off. But I think the concept of whether or not it should be in your environment is an interesting one, because there's two things at play here. One is delayed gratification can work really well for some people. So that's actually, choosing your battles. So do you want to have the M&Ms on your desk each day? And is that going to bring you the most joy? Or would you rather actually on a Friday go for a really nice coffee and cake somewhere where you absolutely are going to savor that cake? You're going to really enjoy it. And so actually it's external to your environment. So it's not in your environment, but you take yourself there and you make it an occasion and you really get the most pleasure out of it. Or are you someone that can actually train yourself to eat in an intuitive way at home? And therefore you can have things in your cupboard. And it might be that you actually start, and this might sound ridiculous, but I would totally believe in starting small, with just having 2 squares of chocolate in your house, because then, that's all you can have at the time. And you're forced to almost make that intuitively, and you're almost rationing yourself in that way. And then, when your confidence builds that you can actually be satisfied with 2 squares, then you can start to have more in your house as it goes on. But it really depends on you as an individual. For me personally, if I know it's there, I'm too aware of the fact that it's there. And if I'm in a bad mood, if I'm hungry, if something bad has happened in work or anything else, my willpower is going to be depleted, and I'm much more likely to reach for that thing. And so I just know that if I don't have it in my environment, it makes it much more likely that I'll actually stay on track. And I always have cake on the weekends because, or like, wine on the weekends and those kind of things. And I really look forward to that. And I really savor that moment when I have it. And that's, this is what I talk about when I talk about finding joy in your healthy habits. If you eat in a way and, exercise in a way and look after your mental health in a certain way, 80% of the time, the rest of that kind of 15, 20% of the time, you can find joy and pleasure in things that maybe aren't as healthy. But if you do so in a mindful way, it's just a much nicer way to live your life than to feel like you're restricted, you're binging, you're restricted, you're binging. You're in this kind of moral dilemma with yourself, constantly talking to yourself about, oh, I ate this, therefore I'm a good person. I did this, therefore I'm a bad person, and all of that. And we don't really want to get into a moral relationship with, our food and our exercise and our health, because that's not a very safe place to be.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Okay, well, Heather, this has been really fascinating, Heather. Where do people go if they want to find out more about what you do?
So my website is just drheathermckee.co.uk. And I've got a new course coming up. So it's the Bite-Size Healthy Habits course. So it's all about making small, tiny changes, but in a very evidence-based and robust way, to kind of create that lasting change. And that's on my website as well. So drheathermckee.co.uk.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much, Heather.
Thanks for your time, John.